The cedar trunk hit the gate scale with a sound like a coffin closing, and every head in the boarding line turned. I felt the weight leave my hands, and I felt the eyes land on me at the same time, both familiar. I am 78 years old, and I have been looked at like that before, like a problem somebody else would have to solve. A young man behind the desk in a navy blazer flinched at the noise. He did not know yet. None of them did. They saw an old woman in a gray cardigan, support shoes, a brass-cornered box too heavy for her to carry, and they made up the whole story in a second. Lost, confused. In the way, they were wrong about every part of it. Before that plane pushed back from Gate 2, the man who struck my name from Seat 2A would stand at attention in that aisle. He would salute me in front of the whole cabin, and not one passenger who had looked away from me would forget my name by the time the wheels came up. But I am getting ahead of myself. I always told the boys, slow your hands, slow your breathing, and the rest will follow. So let me slow it down. It was a Tuesday morning in June at Hattiesburg Laurel Regional, which is one room with 2 gates and a coffee machine that takes quarters. Everybody there is somebody's cousin. The girl scanning bags went to school with my pharmacist's daughter. The man mopping near the window waved at me like he knew my Earl, and maybe he did, because everybody in Hattiesburg knew Earl Tarver. Earl had been gone a year, that spring. A year and 11 days, if you want the number, and I always want the number. He was the kind of man who fixed your fence before you noticed it was broken. He built things with his hands and gave them away. He built that cedar trunk, the one that just hit the scale, in our carport off Hardy Street, 2 blocks up from Mobile, where the magnolia roots have been cracking our front walk since 1971. I was flying to Charlotte that morning to hold my great-grandson at his christening. James Earl, they named him. 8 pounds, born in March. I had the date circled on the calendar by the phone since winter, and I was not going to miss it. I had a seat for the flight. Seat 2A, first class, window, right side. I want to be clear about that seat because the whole thing turns on it. That seat was not luck. It was not a splurge an old widow treated herself to. That seat had my name on it before half the people in that boarding line were born, and it had it because of a thing I did a long time ago that I had spent 50 years trying not to talk about. I will get to that. The brass plate on the front of the trunk said M-6. People ask me about it sometimes. I told them it was just the model number off the lumber. That was a lie, and I'm not ashamed of it. Some lies are a kind of cardigan you keep buttoned over a wound. So, the trunk on the scale. A man came out from behind the desk, not the flinching young one, a different one. Brent Sallis, his name tag said, and under it, in smaller letters, Premier Services Manager. He was maybe 40, pressed, a little soft in the middle, with the careful haircut of a man who checks his own reflection in the airport windows when he thinks no one sees. I noticed his shoes were good, and his watch was better than his shoes. And I noticed his hands were not steady the way a settled man's hands are steady. They moved too much. They tapped the counter. I have spent my whole life reading hands. His were the hands of a man who was scared of something and had decided to take it out on whatever was small and slow and in front of him. "Ma'am," he said, "ma'am, this can't go on like this. This is way over the carry-on dimensions." "It rides with me," I said, low, slow. I do not repeat myself, so I say things once and I say them right. It always has. "There's a notation in the reservation," he typed. He frowned at the screen like the screen had insulted him. And then I watched something move behind his eyes, something that had nothing to do with me or the trunk, and he printed a slip and ran a red pen through a line on it. I could see the red even upside down. "There's no notation," he said. "And I'm sorry, but we've actually got a situation with your seat assignment. 2A is reserved." "2A is mine," I said. "2A is a revenue seat, ma'am." He smiled when he said it. That is the part I remember. He smiled like he was doing me a favor. "I've got you reassigned to 22C. That's a complimentary courtesy seat. No charge. We try to take care of folks. folks. Behind me, a young woman in expensive sunglasses, the kind of pretty that comes with a ring light, stepped up holding a boarding pass, and I understood the whole arithmetic of it without anyone explaining. He had sold my window. He had given my Earl's promise to a girl with 40,000 followers, and he was going to walk me to the back of the bus and call it kindness, and he was going to do it in front of everyone. I did not raise my voice. People mistake quiet for confusion. They mistake folded hands for surrender. I folded my hands on top of the trunk, over the brass plate, the way I have folded them my whole life when a thing is about to go wrong, and I have decided to be still through it. "I'll keep my seat," I said. Once. That is when he lifted his phone. He held it up, casual, like he was checking the time, but the little red dot was on, and he angled it down at me, and his voice changed into the bright public voice men like him use when they have an audience. "Ma'am, I think you might be a little turned around this morning. This cabin's reserved. Happens all the time. Folks get confused about their booking. Let's get you back to your real seat, all right? Let's get you settled." Turned around. He said it twice. Loud enough for the family by the window to hear. Loud enough for the businessman who suddenly found his shoes very interesting. Loud enough that a teenage boy actually laughed before his mother put a hand on his arm. I have been shot at. I want to say that plainly and then move past it because I do not enjoy saying it. I have flown a wounded aircraft through air that was trying very hard to kill me and everyone bleeding in the back. So a man in a blazer with a soft middle and a phone in my face did not frighten me. But there is a particular thing that happens to a body at 78 when a room full of strangers decides you are pitiful. The skin goes hot. The hands want to shake and you will not let them. You feel yourself shrinking down into the small, confused old woman they have already decided you are. And the worst part, the part nobody tells you, is how easy it would be to just become her, to shuffle, to apologize, to go sit in 22C and be grateful for the charity and disappear. I have buried a husband, 2 of my crew, and a man I could not save whose face I still see at 4 a.m. I had no intention of disappearing in the Hattiesburg airport over a window seat, but I did not have my words yet, and Brent Sallis had momentum, and momentum in a crowd is its own kind of weather. He came around the counter. He put a hand near my elbow, not quite touching, herding the way you would move a slow cow off a road, and he started walking me backward toward the mouth of the jet bridge, narrating the whole time for the camera. "There we go. Watch your step. We'll take real good care of you. Somebody's grandma got a little lost this morning, but we've got her. Somebody's grandma got a little lost." The jet bridge smelled like jet fuel and floor wax. There was a seam in the carpet I tripped on, just barely, just enough that the phone caught it, and I heard a small sound go through the people behind us. That soft, ugly coo people make when they watch something sad and feel good about feeling bad. I had my hand on the trunk the whole way. The young man in the navy blazer was dragging it behind us on its little wheels because even Brent Sallis knew better than to take it from my grip by force, and the brass plate scraped the wall, M-6, and I thought of all things. I thought about Earl's hand sanding that brass until it shone. I thought, I never lost the ones I could reach. I do not know why that came to me right then. It is a thing I have said to myself for 50 years, in the dark mostly, a thing that means more than its words. But it steadied me. It put my feet back under me even as that man walked me out of the seat my husband swore was mine until the day I died.
Look, I understand the
We got
policy,
maybe
but this
halfway
is
down the
essential.
bridge.
It's
The
irreplaceable.
cabin door was open ahead, the smell of the recycled cabin air rolling out to meet us, a flight attendant standing in the galley with a tablet and a polite frozen face, and Brent was already telling her, "We've got a reassignment, 22C. She's a little turned around when a voice came from inside the cabin. It came from a man seated on the aisle 3 rows back from the door. An older man, my kind of old, with a flat top gone white and a windbreaker zipped to the throat. He had been looking at me the way the others looked at me, I think, when I first came down the bridge. But somewhere in those last steps, his eyes had dropped to the trunk, to the side of it, where the wheels had scraped the wall, where the canvas cover had slipped back 2 inches and showed a corner of the old kit bag strapped underneath. And on that bag, faded almost to nothing, a patch, a white flower on a field gone the color of weak tea. The man stood up so fast his knee caught the tray table and rattled it. He did not seem to notice. He came up out of that seat and into the aisle, and he stood very straight, straighter than a man his age has any business standing. And he said one thing, not to me, almost to himself, in the voice of a man reading something off the inside of his own skull from 40 years back. Tan Sun Nut, the November loadout, he swallowed. That's Magnolia 6. And the whole jet bridge, the whole front of that airplane, every phone and every snicker and every soft pitying coo went quiet. Not polite quiet, not the quiet of people waiting their turn, the other kind. The kind that comes down over a room like a held breath when the story everybody told themselves about the old woman in the gray cardigan turns out to be the wrong story, and they do not yet know the right one, and they have just understood, all at once, that they are about to. Brent Sallis stopped walking. His hand dropped away from my elbow. The phone in his other hand was still recording. He had not thought to lower it yet. He would in a minute. He would wish, in a minute, that he had never raised it at all. I stood there in the seam of the jet bridge with my hand on Earl's trunk and that white flower showing on the bag, and I closed my eyes for just a second, and I thought about a Tuesday like this one a long way from Mississippi, and I let myself, for the first time in 50 years, be called by the name they gave me when I earned it. 3 hours earlier, before any of this, I had stood at my own front door on Hardy Street and almost decided not to go at all. 3 hours earlier, before any of this, I had stood at my own front door on Hardy Street and almost decided not to go at all. It was not the flight. I have never been afraid of a flight. It was the house, and the way the house gets in the morning when there is only one person left to be in it. The light comes in low off Mobile Street and lays itself across the kitchen floor in long yellow bars. And for a year now, that light has fallen on 1 coffee cup instead of 2. You would not think a thing so small could stop a grown woman in a doorway. It can. It stops me most mornings for a breath or two before I make my feet move. The magnolia by the front walk had dropped its blossoms early that June. They were going brown on the concrete, soft as wet paper, and the roots underneath had lifted the walk another 1/4 inch since spring. Earl used to say he was going to fix that walk every year for 50 years, and never once did, because he knew I liked the unevenness, liked having to watch my step on my own front path. It kept me paying attention. A person who stops watching her step, he said, is a person who has decided nothing else is coming. Earl never decided that. Not once, not even at the end when he had every reason to. I had the cedar trunk packed and waiting in the front room. I had packed it the night before. Slow, the way I do everything now, and I want to tell you about that because it matters to what came after. The trunk sat on the rug where it has sat for years, under the window with a doily and a lamp on top of it like it was just furniture. That is what most people thought it was. Furniture. A homely old box an old couple kept around. Earl built it the year he got his news from the doctors, though I did not understand at the time that the two things were connected. He spent that whole winter in the carport with his hands, and I thought it was just a man keeping busy against bad news. He sanded the cedar until it was pale as butter. He cut the corners with little brass guards, and he set a brass plate on the front and stamped 2 characters into it, M and a 6. And when I asked him why he only smiled and said a man ought to sign his work, I knew what M-6 meant. He knew that I knew. We did not say it out loud, not once in all those years, because saying it out loud meant opening a door I had nailed shut a long time before, and Earl was the only person alive who would never, ever ask me to open it. That was the kindest thing about him. He carried what I could not say without ever once making me say it. The night before the flight, I lifted the lamp and the doily off the trunk, and I opened the lid to pack my good dress for the christening, the navy one with the buttons, and the little white shoes I bought for James Earl, and a framed picture of Earl for the front pew so he could be there too, in the only way left to him. And when I lifted the tray that sits in the top of the trunk, the shallow one with the cloth lining, I found the note. I had not seen it before. I want to be plain about that because it is the strangest part, and I have turned it over in my mind 100 times since. It was tucked up under the lip of the tray lid, folded twice, gone soft at the creases like it had been waiting a long time to be found. It was Earl's hand. I would know Earl's hand at the bottom of the sea. He wrote in pencil, all capitals, the way he wrote on lumber. It said, "When they try to move you, Dory, open the bottom. Not before." That was all. No date, no name. Just that. I sat down on the rug next to the trunk with that scrap of paper in my hand, and I did not move for a long while. Open the bottom. I knew the trunk had a bottom. I had loaded and unloaded that trunk 100 times and never once thought about how deep it was inside compared to how deep it looked from the outside, because you do not measure the furniture in your own front room. But Earl measured. Earl measured everything. Earl was a crew chief before he was my husband, and a crew chief is a man who knows to the eighth of an inch where everything is and what it weighs and why, because the lives in the back of the aircraft depend on him knowing. He built that trunk the year he got his news. He cut a compartment into the bottom of it, and he left me a note telling me not to open it until somebody tried to move me. When they try to move you, not if. When? How did he know? That is the question that got its hands around my throat that night on the rug and has not fully let go since. How did a dying man in a carport off Hardy Street know that on a Tuesday in June, a year and 11 days after we put him to rest, a stranger in a blazer would put his hand near my elbow and try to walk me out of the seat he swore was mine? He could not have known. And yet he built the answer into a box and signed it M-6 and waited. I did not open the bottom that night. He said not before, and I have spent my whole life following the orders of men I trusted, and there was no man I trusted like Earl. So I folded the note back up and I tucked it where I found it, and I finished packing, and I set the lamp and the doily back on top, and I went to bed in a house with one coffee cup, and I did not sleep much, which is nothing new. In the morning, I stood in the doorway and looked at the brown blossoms on the broken walk, and I put my hand in the pocket of my gray cardigan, the right pocket, where I keep a thing I have kept on me near every day for 50 years. A brass coin, worn smooth as a creek stone. You cannot read what is stamped on it anymore unless you know already what it says, the way you can only read a worn gravestone with your fingers. I rubbed my thumb across it the way I do, and the old shape was there under my thumb, even though the eye could not find it. And that is the thing about what we carry. It stays in the shape of our hands long after it fades from sight. That coin is the reason I almost did not go, because to fly to Charlotte, I had to go through that little airport where everybody is somebody's cousin, and I had to sit in a seat that was given to me for a thing I did, and I have never in 50 years been able to sit in that seat without the coin going hot in my pocket, without the face coming up, the one I see at 4 in the morning, the young one, the one I could not reach. Earl's baby brother? He was 19. He was in the back of my aircraft on the worst night of my life, and I flew everyone I could out through air that was doing its level best to end us. And I got the steadiest hands in the unit, and they gave me a name for it. And I brought out every soul I could reach, but I could not reach them all. That is the whole of it. That is the thing under the cardigan, the wound the buttoned wool has covered for 50 years. They gave me a medal for that night. They gave me honor for it. And I could not make my hands take honor that was bought with that particular blood, because it felt like theft, like I had been paid for the one I lost. And so I came home and I put every medal and every citation and every ribbon in a tin, and I buried the tin in the dark, and I told Earl I never wanted to see them again. And Earl, God keep him, said, "All right, Dory, all right." And he never asked me to dig them up. What I did not know, standing in that doorway, was that he had dug them up himself. Quietly. Years ago. That he had taken that tin out of the dark and built it a place to live in the bottom of a cedar trunk, in the light, 2 blocks from Mobile Street, and left it there for the day somebody tried to make me small. I locked the front door. I always lock it, though there is nothing in that house anybody would want except the things nobody could ever know to want. My neighbor's boy, Roy, drove me to the airport. Roy Acker, a big quiet man who works the ramp out at the regional field and did 2 tours himself a long time after mine, and who has called me Miss Doris since he was in short pants. He carried the trunk to his truck without being asked, and he set it down gentle as an egg, and he looked at the brass plate the way he always looks at it, a half-second too long, and then he looked away, because Roy is the kind of man who knows when a thing is not his to ask about. In the truck he said, "You all right this morning, Miss Doris?" I said I was. I am a poor liar to people who love me and a fine one to everybody else. And Roy knew, but he let it lie. He pulled out onto Hardy Street and we went past the brown magnolias and past the church and past the corner where Earl used to buy his nails. And Roy said, real quiet, eyes on the road, "Mr. Earl ever tell you he won my daddy's claim back for him?" I said he had not. Roy nodded like he figured. "Years ago," he said, "my daddy fought the government 11 years for what he was owed and got nothing. And one day, Mr. Earl sat down at our kitchen table with a box of papers and would not leave till it was sorted. And 90 days later, my daddy got his due and cried at this very wheel. He never told you." "No," I said, "he never did." That was Earl. That was the whole man, right there in Roy Acker's truck on the way to Gate 2. He fixed your fence before you noticed it was broken. He won back a man's claim and never mentioned it at supper. He built a box with a false bottom and a note in pencil and carried my honor in the light for years, while I thought it was still buried in the dark. And he never once made me say thank you, because he knew I could not yet, and he was a patient man. The most patient man I ever flew for or loved. Roy let me out at the curb. He set the trunk on its little wheels and he put my hand on the handle and he closed his big hand over mine for just a second. And he said, "You let somebody help you with this today, Miss Doris." And I said I would, and I meant to mean it. And then I went inside that little one-room airport where everybody is somebody's cousin, and I got in the boarding line, and a young man in a navy blazer flinched at the weight of my husband's last gift hitting the scale. And the whole thing I have been telling you began. So now you know what was in my pocket, and you know there was a bottom to that trunk I had been told not to open until I was moved. I had just been moved. So let me bring you back now to the jet bridge, because that is where I left myself standing, and a story ought to be told the way a thing happens, in order, even when the heart wants to run ahead. Master Sergeant Calvin Pruitt was on his feet in the aisle. I had not known his name yet standing there, but I knew the shape of him the second he came up out of that seat, because there is a way certain men stand that the body never forgets, a squaring that has nothing to do with the spine and everything to do with the years. He had said the words, "Tan Sun Nut, the November loadout. That's Magnolia 6. And those words went down the length of that little airplane and out into the gate, and they changed the air in the room the way a front changes the air before rain, when the leaves all turn their pale sides up at once and everything holds still. I did not say anything. I want you to understand that because it is the center of who I am, and I have never been able to explain it to people who did not earn the right to understand it. When they put their hands near you, when they strike your name off a slip and reprint it in red and call you turned around in front of a room full of phones, The whole of you wants to rise up and tell them who you are. The whole of you wants to make them know. And the thing I learned in the worst hours of my life, the thing that kept the back of my aircraft alive when the air was trying to kill us all, is that the wanting to rise up is the very thing you cannot do. You go still instead. You go so still that the fools around you read it as confusion, as an old woman fumbling her bag, and you let them read it wrong, because the stillness is not for them. The stillness is the hands. The stillness is what flies the bird. I folded my hands over the handle of Earl's trunk, and I let Calvin Pruitt's words stand in the air without adding one of my own. And I watched the young man in the navy blazer try to decide what to do with a room that had just turned under his feet. His name tag said, Brent Sallis. Premier Services, it said under that, in the little raised letters they give a man instead of a raise. He had been so sure of himself 90 seconds before. He had walked me backward down that bridge with his hand hovering at my elbow like he was guiding a grocery cart, narrating the whole time in that bright, managing voice. This way, ma'am. We'll get you sorted. There's a comfortable seat for you up front in the cabin, meaning the back, meaning the seat by the lavatory they keep for the ones nobody will fight for. He had reprinted my slip in red. I had watched him do it. I had stood at the desk and watched him strike a line clean through Tarver D, seat 2A, and assign it to a young woman with a phone on a little stick and a great many followers. He told her so. He said it like it was a weather report, and the young woman had the grace at least to look uncomfortable, which is more than I can say for him. And now the room had turned, and Brent Sallis was standing in the mouth of the jet bridge with his own phone still up and recording, filming a thing he had not yet understood he did not want filmed. I could see it working on him. I could see him doing the arithmetic of it, the way his eyes went from Pruitt to me to the patch on the kit bag and back, trying to make the numbers come out the way they had a minute ago, when the story was simple, and he was the small king of Gate 2, and I was a lost grandma holding up his boarding. The numbers would not come out that way anymore. But a man like that does not surrender the first time the arithmetic fails him. A man like that doubles down, because the doubling down is the only thing between him and the cold water he is treading. And I did not know yet what his cold water was, but I have lived long enough to know that cruelty that public is never about the person it lands on. It is always about something the cruel man is running from. I would learn what Brent Sallis was running from soon enough. We all would. Ma'am, he said, and his voice had a new edge in it now, a thinner one. I'm going to need that trunk checked. It's over the dimension for the cabin. It should have been checked at the counter. He gestured at it with the hand that held the phone, and the camera swung wild across the ceiling and the faces and came back. If you'll just let me take it, we can get everybody boarded. There it was. Let me take it. The oldest sentence in the world, dressed up in a blazer. Let me take the thing you are holding. Let me take it off your hands for your own good, because you are too old and too small and too turned around to carry it yourself. Earl heard that sentence coming 40 years off. Earl built a box specifically so that on the day a man said, "Let me take it," to me in a public place, I would have an answer made of cedar and brass instead of words, because Earl knew I would not give them words. When they try to move you, Dory, open the bottom, not before. I had been moved. I was being moved still, the man's hand reaching even now for the brass handle. So I did the thing my husband told me to do from inside a note folded soft as cloth. And the thing I did first was simply this. I tightened my hands on the handle, and I looked up at Brent Sallis, and I spoke for the first time since the desk, low and slow, the way I say everything, one time and no louder than it needs to be. You may not take it, I said, but you may watch me open it. A flight attendant had come up the bridge behind him by then, drawn by the quiet the way people are drawn by quiet, and she stood at his shoulder. Her tag said Tamika Boyd. She was maybe 30, maybe a little more, with kind, tired eyes and her hair pulled back tight for the long day. And she was looking at the brass plate on the front of the trunk the way Roy Acker always looked at it, a half second too long. Her lips moved. I saw her read it. M-6. I saw her not understand it, and understand at the same time that it was the thing the old soldier in the aisle had just said out loud, and I saw her hand come up to her own collarbone the way a person's hand does when something is moving in them that has not yet reached their face. I knelt down to the trunk. That took me a moment. 78 years does not kneel the way 19 knelt, and I went down slow, one hand on the cedar lid, and not one soul in that bridge said a word or tried to help me, because the room had understood by then that this was a thing I was going to do with my own hands or not at all. I worked the 2 brass catches at the front, the ones Earl set with his thumbs in a cold carport the winter he got his news, and they gave the way they always give, with that small sound like a key, turning in a good lock. And I lifted the lid. On top, where I had packed them the night before, were the things of an ordinary woman flying to an ordinary joy. My navy dress with the buttons, folded in tissue. The little white shoes for James Earl, no bigger than my 2 thumbs. The framed picture of Earl in his good shirt, the one I meant to set in the front pew so he could see his great-grandson welcomed into the church he loved. I lifted these out one at a time and I handed them. I did not set them down. I handed them, and it was Tamika Boyd who took them, because she had come close and put her hands out without being asked, and she held my husband's photograph against her chest like it was her own grandfather, and her eyes had gone wet and she did not bother to hide it. Then I lifted the shallow tray out of the top of the trunk, the cloth-lined one, and I set it aside. And under the tray, folded the way I had not seen it folded since I was a young woman with steady hands and a job that asked everything of them, was a flight suit gone soft and pale with age, the green washed nearly to gray and stitched to the breast of it, faded almost to nothing but not to nothing, a white flower on a field the color of weak tea, a magnolia, the same flower that showed on the kit bag, the same flower that is stamped, if you know to feel for it, on a brass coin worn smooth as a creek stone in the right pocket of a gray cardigan. I heard Calvin Pruitt make a sound behind me. It was not a word. It was the sound a man makes when a thing he had only ever read about in a citation, a thing that to him was history, was somebody else's legend, stands up out of a cedar trunk in a little airport in South Mississippi, and turns out to have been sitting across the aisle from him the whole flight, folding her hands when she was insulted. I did not turn around to look at him. I lifted the flight suit out and I laid it across my knees, and the bridge was so quiet now, you could hear the jet fuel ticking in the lines under the floor and the floor wax smell coming up, and somebody, far back in the line, somebody who could not even see, starting to cry without knowing why. Brent Sallis had lowered his phone. He did not remember deciding to. It was just down at his side now, still recording the floor, and his face had gone a color I have seen on young men before. The color of a person watching the ground he was standing on turn out to be the surface of deep water. He opened his mouth. I think he meant to say something about the dimensions of the trunk again, about the rules, because rules were the last dry thing he had to stand on. But Tamika Boyd spoke before he could, and her voice came out cracked down the middle. Tarver, she said. She was looking at the brass plate, and then at me, and then at the photograph she still held against her chest. Tarver. The Tarver Fund. She said it almost to herself, the way Pruitt had said the name of the airfield like she was reading it off the inside of her own skull. I had a scholarship for my nursing. From a fund I never could find out who, the letter just said a family that wanted to help a Hattiesburg girl get her cap. Her hand was shaking on Earl's photograph. The Tarver Fund. That was you. That was your name on it. That was Earl, I said, low, one time. That was my husband. He never told me he did it. He never told anybody he did anything. And I had not known until that moment in the jet bridge with a young nurse weeping over his picture that the man I buried a year and 11 days before had reached his quiet hand into the life of the very woman who would be standing over me on the day I needed somebody in that uniform to know my name. He could not have known that either. And yet, I had not even reached the bottom of the trunk. The flight suit and the patch had only quieted the room. What Earl built into the floor of that box, under a false bottom milled to the 1/8 of an inch the winter the doctors gave him his news, was still waiting under my knees, and I put my hand flat on the cedar and felt along the back left corner for the joint that did not look like a joint, the dovetail with the catch hidden inside it, the one a person would have to read like an aircraft panel to ever find. My fingers knew where it was, the way they knew the shape on the coin. I pressed it. And somewhere under the bottom of the trunk that everyone in that boarding line had mocked me for hauling, something gave with a small wooden sound, and the floor of the box dropped a 1/4 inch into my waiting hand. I did not lift it yet. I knelt there with my fingers on the released catch, and I let myself feel, for just one breath, the size of what my husband had done, building me an answer in the dark and trusting that I would still have the hands to open it. The false bottom came up into my hand the way a thing comes up that has been waiting a long time in the dark to be needed, light and dry and smelling of cedar oil and the particular cold of a carport in January. And there, lying flat in a space milled so close to its dimensions that it had not shifted a 1/4 inch in a year of riding in the back of Roy Acker's truck, was an envelope, not a new one. The paper had gone the soft yellow of an old hymnal, and across the front of it, in a hand I would have known in a dark room with my eyes shut, in the careful block printing of a man who built things for a living and wrote the way he measured twice before he cut, were 2 words, for Dory. I lifted it out. I want to tell you my hands did not shake, because that is the whole of the story I have been trying to tell you, that the hands are the last thing to go and the first thing that matters. But I am an old woman, and I will not lie to you now. They shook. They shook the way they had not shaken over the controls of any aircraft in any weather, because weather you can fly. You cannot fly the handwriting of a man you have buried. Tamika Boyd knelt down beside me. She still had Earl's photograph against her chest, and she put her free hand flat on my back, light, the way you steady someone who is about to stand, and she did not say anything, and that was the kindest thing anyone did for me that whole day. I opened the envelope. Inside it was a single sheet of heavy paper, the real kind, the kind with a weight to it, and a letterhead at the top that I had not seen since I was a young woman with a wet behind the ears, lieutenant's bars, and a logbook full of nights I do not talk about. It was the name of the man who had started this very airline, back when it was 3 planes and a hangar and a handshake, the man who had stood on a tarmac in 1971 and watched a load of wounded boys come off the back of an aircraft I had flown out through a wall of fire, and had asked that day who the pilot was, and had been told and had not believed it, and had walked over to look at me himself. And the letter, signed by his own hand in ink gone brown at the edges, said that for as long as his company put planes in the sky, the pilot of that aircraft and her crew would fly in the first seats of it, at his expense, and his children's expense, and his children's children's, and that no clerk, no manager, no merger, no rule written by a man who was not standing on that tarmac would ever have the standing to tell her otherwise. I did not read it out loud. I did not have the breath. But Calvin Pruitt had come down the aisle by then, slow, one hand on the seat backs, and he read it over my shoulder, and it was Calvin Pruitt, Master Sergeant retired, who read it out loud to the whole of that jet bridge in a voice that broke on the founder's name and did not try to hide the break. And when he finished, there was a silence in that little airport in Hattiesburg that I have only heard a few times in my life. The silence that comes into a room when everyone in it understands at the same moment that they have been standing in the presence of something and treating it like luggage. Brent Sallis had not said a word in a long while. I looked up at him from the floor where I knelt, and his phone was all the way down now, dark, forgotten in his hand, and his face had stopped doing arithmetic. It had gone past that to the place a man goes when the numbers will not ever come out again, when the cold water has closed over the top of his head and he has stopped pretending he can stand. I knew, looking at him, that there was a thing under his cruelty, because there always is, and I would learn within the hour what it was, that his little division was on a list to be cut, that there was a house out in Oak Grove with more owed on it than it was worth, and that he had been quietly striking veterans off their courtesy seats for months to make a revenue number that would let him keep telling himself he was saving the jobs of real people from freeloaders. I would learn that he believed it. That is the part that has stayed with me. He believed he was the one doing the hard, necessary thing. But I did not know it yet. Kneeling there. And so I reached back into the floor of the trunk and I lifted out the last two things Earl had hidden under his own grief in a cold carport. The first was a tin, a flat olive tin with a dent in one corner, and inside it, folded in the same tissue as my church dress, was a citation on government paper with a seal pressed into it. And I will not read you what it says because I never have read it out loud and I'm not going to start in front of strangers. But I will tell you that it has my name on it, Tarver, D, and a date in November, and the name of a field on the far side of the world, and 3 words about what was done that night to bring 11 boys home through air that was doing everything it could to kill us all. I closed the tin. I have always closed the tin. And the second thing, the very last thing, was nothing at all to look at. It was a brass coin, round, worn so smooth on both faces by 40 years, in the right-hand pocket of a cardigan, that you could barely feel the flower stamped into it anymore. The magnolia, the same flower on the patch on the suit, folded across my knees. I did not lift it out of the trunk. I lifted it out of my own pocket where it had been the whole time, riding against my hip through the whole of my humiliation. Because the proof I needed I had been carrying on my own body all along, and the one in the tin was its twin, Earl's. The match set he had made for me the year we married, so that neither of us would ever be all the way alone in a room. That was when I heard the cockpit door. There is a sound a flight deck door makes, a heavy, deliberate sound, and then there were footsteps coming aft up the aisle, unhurried, the footsteps of a man who has decided something and is not going to be talked out of it. The passengers turned in their seats. Brent Sallis stepped back against the bulkhead to let him pass, and the captain came down the length of his own airplane in his shirt sleeves with 4 stripes on each shoulder, a big man going gray at the temples, and his name tag said Marcus Vance, and he was looking at the patch on the flight suit across my knees, and his jaw was working the way Tamika's had, the way a person's face works when the thing inside them has finally reached the surface. He stopped in front of me. He looked down at me for a long moment. An old woman on her knees on the floor of a jet bridge with a dead man's flight suit in her lap. And then Captain Marcus Vance came to attention in the aisle of his own aircraft, heels together, shoulders back, chin level, and he raised his right hand to his brow in a salute as crisp and as slow as any I have ever been given. And he held it, and he said, not loud, just loud enough, Magnolia 6. Ma'am, it is an honor I did not think I would live to have. Nobody told the passengers to stand. They stood anyway. Up and down that little airplane, people I had never met and would never see again came up out of their seats. And the influencer with the phone on the stick was crying openly now and had put the phone away. And Brent Sallis was pressed against the bulkhead with his hand over his mouth, watching the man who flew the plane salute the woman he had called, turned around and walked backward down a jet bridge for the cameras. Captain Vance brought his hand down. Then he did a thing I was not ready for. He reached into his own shirt pocket behind the wings pinned there, and he took out a brass coin, worn smooth, a magnolia gone almost to nothing on its face, and he knelt down across from me, this big graying man in his captain's stripes, and he set his coin on the cedar lid next to mine, and they were the same. They were the same coin. And he said, "Lo, just for me." My daddy carried this his whole life. He told me a pilot put it in his hand on the back of a bird coming out of Tan Sun Nut in November of '71, when he had given up. He told me she had the steadiest hands he ever saw, and she never said one word the whole flight. He looked for you for 40 years, ma'am. He died still looking. And I will tell you the thing I have never told anyone, the thing I murmured into Marcus Vance's collar when he leaned in, and I put my old hand on the back of his neck the way I could not put it on his father's that night. I had said for 50 years to myself and to Earl and to no one else that I never lost the ones I could reach. I said it like a prayer, and I said it like a wound because it was both. His daddy I reached. 11 of them I reached. But there was one I could not reach, one strapped in, too far back when the air came apart. Earl's own younger brother, who I had promised Earl I would bring home, and who I did not bring home, and that is why I buried the medals and the patch and the citation in the bottom of a trunk and let people think I was a confused old woman with too much luggage. Because honor that costs you the one you swore to protect does not feel like honor. It feels like something you stole. Earl knew that. Earl knew it better than I did. And so, he did not argue with me. He built me a box instead, and he cut the joinery the winter the doctors told him his number was up, and he milled a hidden compartment to the exact size of a letter he had kept for 40 years. And he wrote me a note that said, "When they try to move you, open the bottom, not before." Because he knew, the way he knew weather, that the day was coming when somebody would try to tell me I was nobody. And he wanted me to have an answer made of cedar and brass instead of words, because he knew I would never give them the words. He spent his last good winter making sure that on the worst morning of my widowhood, I would not be alone in the room. That is the kind of man Earl Tarver was. I did not deserve him, and I told him so every day for 51 years, and he never once agreed with me. What happened to Brent Sallis I will tell you quickly, because grace does not need a long telling. The airline opened a look into the courtesy seats that had been quietly struck off all over the region, and the names that had been bumped. Old men mostly. Old men who had not made a fuss because making a fuss was not in them. Those names went back onto the manifests in ink, and the lifetime honor program that a clerk's red pen had been chipping away at got its own line in the rule book again, written so no small king of any gate could ever strike it. They did not put Brent Sallis out on the street. I asked them not to. I went to the trouble of asking, because I had seen the cold water close over his head, and I knew it was not the airline he was afraid of. It was the house, and the number, and the lie he had told himself to live with it. And a man drowning in that does not need another hand pushing down. They moved him to a desk where he could not reprint anyone's name in red, and they gave him a way back if he wanted it. And the last thing he said to me at the mouth of the bridge, with his eyes wet and his voice gone small, was that he was sorry. And I told him the truth, which is that I had been treated worse by better men and had flown them home anyway. He did not understand it. He will someday. They mostly do. They put me in 2A. The influencer girl gave the seat back before anyone asked her to, and the crew found her another up front, and Tamika Boyd stowed Earl's trunk in the closet by the galley with her own 2 hands and would not let the ramp touch it. Across the aisle from me there was a young soldier going home on leave, 18 maybe, his uniform too new, his hands not yet steady, watching all of it with his mouth open. As we climbed out over the pines, over Hardy Street and the avenues and the magnolias, cracking the sidewalks of the only town I have ever called mine, I reached across the aisle and I took his young hand and I turned it palm up and I closed my husband's coin into it. The worn one, the smooth one, the one with the flower gone almost to nothing. I pressed the coin into his palm and folded his fingers shut. Magnolia 6 is boarding others now.